This morning I had a different approach to things. I decided to warm up the glutes and hamstrings, make sure they are long and strong, get blood into them before heading over into the squatting motion, the overhead squat. This is a time-proven thing for me. Glutes and hamstrings are key components into, in me feeling good when I squat. That's as simple as that. When I get my hamstrings and glutes to be long, I feel strong. It's simple as that. If I wake up in the morning, especially early morning, and I just basically stand up and I go to reach my toes with straight knees, and if I can't get down to mid-shin, it's going to be a shit squat session. It's simple as that. Because I need to have deep hip flexion, deep range of motion when I squat. If I can't get into that position in a good posture, i.e. a flat back or knees getting over your toes and all that sort of stuff, then I'm going to be compromised in those positions and therefore feel weaker. So the key components for me seem to be hamstrings and glutes. They are tied in. They are kind of like the same team. They extend the hip together, and when they can do that really well, I can squat really deep. If you look at a ATG squat from the side, what do you see? You see full hip flexion. The femur is basically resting on your chest, something like that, right? It's all the way, withdrawn, the knee's all the way to the chest. The ankle is at its maximal dorsiflexion. So there's flexion, right? The hip, and there's also flexion of the knee. So it's triple flexion, right? We often talk about triple extension. Well, triple flexion is also a thing. Like we need to be in that range of motion to go from there up. And so if you can't get into that range properly, and you force it, you often talk about this. Sometimes I can't get into an ATG position with no weight on my back, but if I put a couple of plates on my back and I squat down, all of a sudden I get compressed. It's like a spring, right? Well, imagine if I could get into that ATG position without the compression. Now we're talking. Now I can, manipulate that position. Now I can get into those positions with confidence and precision, right? We often talk about in basketball how every shot is a different shot, right? So every time you catch the ball, it's going to be slightly different than the previous time. And so it's kind of like this with squatting. Every squat, even though we want it to be the same, it might not be the same, especially with weight. We practice to make sure it is as close to that threshold of similarity as much as possible. That's what makes good shooters. That's what makes good squatters, technicians. But sometimes it's not the same because every morning, every day I train at different times of the day. So some mornings I wake up and I'm like, man, I got nothing to work with today. What are we going to do? And so what I've worked out over these freaking million days is that if I just come in and I work on the things on the back of me, right? Glutes and hamstrings. When those guys let go, I feel good. And so that's what I did today. Even though I did rack pulls yesterday, quite heavy, I decided to come in today, drop the range a little bit. So I dropped the pins, the safety pins on the rack to about mid-shin. So from mid-shin onwards, and I was really trying to look up, really extend my neck. I've spoken about this with a couple of you fellas when you ask me, why do you look down when you deadlift? Well, when I look up, when I deadlift, when I pull, it seems to be that I kind of bias my back more. So I generally feel I get a pump in my lower back. The erectors are kind of more turned on. And I seem to do that, early hip rise motion, like that whole stripper deadlift type of movement where, the knees kind of straighten out first and then you follow it up with the hips. So it's kind of like a two-part lift. That's what happens when I look up. But when I look down and I kind of focus on that anterior core stability contraction, when I really kind of feel my six-pack turn on, then I can almost kind of easier get into my quads, right? So this is where a lot of people tell me, Ivan, you should be looking up. Well, not necessarily, man. Like if you are somebody that is struggling to get any leg drive out of a deadlift, I would say to you to look down. I'm not talking about like tucking your chin to your freaking chest, but I'm saying, bias your neck position towards that because just try it. Like if you're sitting there, listen to me right now, look up, see what happens. If you really, really extend your neck, you feel your erectors kind of fire up. If you really, really look down, put your chin to your chest, you feel your abs fire up. Well, that's kind of how it works for me. I've tried this many times over. I've tried looking really up at the ceiling, and all I ever freaking do is like a stiff-legged deadlift. But when I look down, I feel like I'm more in my quads, and both the knees and the hips extend at the same time, and I'm much, much, much more stronger there. But today I decided to do the other way. So look up, bias that back, bias that hamstring, the whole glute complex. I don't really need the quads, right? Because the bar starting at mid-shin. So there is basically no knee traveled over the bar, because if I did that, I wouldn't be able to move the bar. The bar would hit the knee. So this is purely a posterior chain thing. So might as well look up and really kind of look like a weight lifter. Every time I think of the Chinese, that's what they do. They're always looking up, looking really, really high up. But then when I think about some of my favorite deadlifters of all time, Konstantin Konstantinovos, right, the KK guy. God rest his soul. A few years ago we lost him. He's like legend of the game. He's the guy that deadlifted some stupid weight, and then like took his top off, and he was like, "This is my fucking belt," right? And he was pointing to my to his belly, right? So this is a guy that used to set up. I don't know if you guys ever seen him. He used to set up really rounded over, like he was really facilitating his abs because he wanted the leg drive. I'm assuming. I mean, I don't live with the guy. I never knew the guy. But you see guys do that. Now, he is a bear. He is a bear of a man. And so if you're listening to this and you're day one in the gym, please don't just round your spine and deadlift. But you can learn something from that, right? You can still keep your neutral spine, but think about what your abs are doing, because that's the belt, right? This is essentially what we're talking about, right? Like people put belts on not to stabilize their lower back. They put the belts on to stabilize what's happening at the front, the gut. Why? Because on the other side, you got a skeleton, right? And so pressure's not going to go through the damn spine. Pressure's going to go through your abdominals, right? Above that is the rib cage. Below that is the pelvis. So it's a whole bunch of sturdy type of structures. Right in there is nothing, right? And so when we do the Valsalva maneuver and we, depress the diaphragm, right? So we take a deep breath, the diaphragm drops. We make a whole bunch of intra-abdominal pressure, and we hope that that's going to suffice. And then we contract the abs over the top of that, and then you have like this pressurized environment in which you can kind of rely on, for power not to leak. But if you extend your back, let's say hyperextend your back, then you increase the space of this cavity, of this chamber, i.e. the abdominal cavity. And all of a sudden it becomes harder for you to contract, right? Because you're now stretching those abs. So that's why it makes sense to have a flexed spine, let's just say. Flexed spine, because now you are bringing your ribs down closer to the pelvis and you have a smaller cavity to pressurize. And what do we know about pressure? Well, the smaller the space, the higher pressure we can accumulate, right? Pressure, what is the physics freaking equation? Like size and pressure and whatever. It makes sense, right? If you have the same amount of atoms in a bigger room, you're going to have less pressure than if you have those same atoms really, really tiny space. It's more pressure, right? That kind of mentality. So this is why I basically look down, because I have these freaking T-Rex arms and my starting position is basically really, really bent over. So if I do the whole Ripperto setup where I stick my shins all the way to the bar, or the bar's over my midfoot, and I bend over like anybody's business, right? Fully bend over, and I look up, my friend, you will not see me deadlift much weight at all. It is going to be a stiff-legged deadlift because I'm starting with vertical shins. And if I start with vertical shins, my torso is basically parallel to the ground. And if I'm parallel to the ground and I look up, it is literally a hip hinge movement. My knees, my quads are basically sleeping. So over those 900 odd days of practicing biasing the quads and all this sort of stuff, I squat every day. I'd like to think my quads are useful. After all these days of practicing, I've gone, okay, let me move the bar further away from my shin, right? So I can have a bit of knee travel, so I can get into those squats. And if I look down and really concentrate on my abs, all of a sudden I have a bit of fire off the bottom. It's not just a hip extension. I kind of nudge the bar, I get it going, and then I follow through with the hip extension. But it kind of happens at the same time. Anyway, kind of derailed there for a little bit. I started talking about the overhead squat, but this is why I look down when I deadlift. Today I didn't, because I really wanted to bias the hamstrings, because once again, it's a freaking rack pull, and the rack pulls, you're not gonna, working out, your quads at all. It is just a supplementary lift, hitting what you need to hit. So I did that, and I went over to the overhead squats, and it felt better. It felt better, and you guys would have seen as well that I did those shoulder dislocations, which a whole bunch of you guys recommended. That freaking thing is amazing. You know, I haven't done this for like 10 years. I remember seeing some old fella do it in the gym the first time I kind of rocked up to the gym, and I started doing it, you know, because of him. And I liked it, you know, really kind of stretch out the chest and whatever and the shoulders. But I didn't really know what I was doing. I did it because, that's the right thing to do. Now I'm like, okay, I got to do this. And it felt great. It felt great to really open up the chest. I'm so tight, man. I'm so tight, man. Anyway, it felt better when I went overhead. And then I went over to front squats and I ran up to 120, and that was basically the session. But the bottom line to all of this is that I'm thinking right now that getting out of a car, going to the gym, walking out and just going straight into an overhead squat, it is not the right cascade of events for me. Because I'm a beginner and because I'm not all that mobile, I got to be able to do some other things to prepare me for this advanced movement. And that's what it is. Overhead squatting is not something that you teach somebody day one. You know, this is a advanced movement which needs to be massaged. People need to be massaged into it. And so what type of massage exercise you want to do? Well, I like I said, getting the glutes and hamstrings on the map, getting some blood through there, turning them on, letting that fascia release a little bit because those muscles are now doing the work for the fascia. And then you can kind of explore those deep hip flexion movements. This is something that Clarence Kennedy, I've watched him many times squat. And what I see for him is that he's an extraordinary hip extensor. His musculature, like when he goes into a deep squat, you will see his knees shoot back, and then he kind of like good mornings that thing up a little bit, right? His back is extraordinarily strong. Like he's a beast, right? And that's what I see in him. Like I see that he biases his posterior chain a lot. If you see him squat, you see his knees travel back, and then his back takes over like a freak. He drops the clutch from like 10 grand, twin turbo freaking 2JZ engine. He just lets it rip and he just gets it up. So his knees are not as strong as his hips and back. So the squat is not all knees. I mean, you can squat all knees, but I think majority of people that are really strong, we shouldn't say that because we're all kind of different. At least I'm kind of like Clarence. I feel like a lot of my squatting power comes from my hips, from able to kind of get into a deep position and get out of that deep position using my hips and back. That's kind of how I look at it. Anyway, guys, let me get out of here and go to work. Thank you everyone on the list, Patreon list, Instagram, obviously, and the comments in YouTube. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.